Okay, so as soon as you guys leave here, you are going to be interpreters, and I expect all of you to learn like 3 languages in the next 45 minutes, okay? Okay, so I did have a video. We're having some technical difficulties putting it up, so I'm gonna wing it. My name is Alexandra Caballero. I'm an English-Spanish interpreter. I'm a registered courtroom interpreter for the Supreme Court of Oklahoma. My clinic that I serves the uninsured, impoverished population. A lot of our patients are, the majority of our patients are Spanish speaking, so it's kind of helpful that they have an interpreter working there. We run into a lot of patients that do not have interpreters available. So I want to clarify, this is not some sort of textbook, or I'm not teaching you a lesson. I'm giving you my personal experience, my personal opinion of how to better interpret. One of the first things that I'm going to ask you is to stop calling interpreters translators. That's one of the main things that you do. We're not translators, okay? Your Google is a translator, and sometimes not that efficient, but we are interpreters. What our main purpose is to take a message from the source language, whatever it may be, and interpret it to our target language and make sure that the patient or the recipient is understanding, grasping the concept of the message that the provider is giving. So that is one of the main things. 2, I have a group of students and volunteers that I interact with on a daily basis. And we all have one main rule. Most of my high school students will know it right off heart. For me, in the work setting that we have, this is our main rule for interpretation. The possibility of you being able to interpret something that you did not understand is 0%. If you do not know what is being said to you, there is no possible way you can transfer that into another language. And as interpreters, okay, you haven't? Sorry. You want to try sending it to yourself again? Yep. Yes. Oh, did you check your spam? Okay, while they're doing we're trying to figure out what we're doing with our lives here. So that's one of the main things that I reiterate to my students. It doesn't matter what language it is. If you are not understanding the message, the likelihood of you being able to transfer that is going to be 0. Interpreters, we need to stop being scared to say, doctor, PA, nurse, judge, whoever. I didn't understand. Can you rephrase that, please? Okay? If they bite your head off, they bite your head off. It is what it is. I would rather, upset a doctor by having them repeat the message, maybe using layman's terms or doing something, saying it just a little bit different, than giving my patient the wrong information, okay? So your patient always has to come first, okay? And that's one of the things that sometimes when we're not confident or when we don't trust the provider and the provider doesn't trust us, and we have specific doctors to where I'm very, very scared to say, hey, I didn't get that, because I know that I'm going to get the look, and once I get that look, then I turn red, and I feel like I'm not very bright. But if I don't ask, I run the risk of my patient not understanding what is happening. So this is a case scenario. So I'll just hit, no, not yet. So this is something that happened at my clinic, okay? We had an interpreter, sweet interpreter. She's excellent. She was a little nervous. We were in with a neurologist, right? And she didn't quite understand what was going on. And there's, whenever their title ends with ologist, it just makes it all that more scary to interpret for, because they're going to use these big, long words. And of course, none of us want to seem like we don't know what we're doing. So there's where we run into the situation of, am I going to continue? Or am I going to say, hey, provider, please rephrase that. So our patient ended up getting sent to the ER with what she thought was a severe UTI. By the time I came to give her the checkout paperwork, and I explained to her that she had a tumor in her brain, she was very confused. So there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of confusion. It was a simple error. It was one word that was misinterpreted, okay? So she thought, there's something wrong with my bladder, not there is a tumor in my brain. This is how much we can affect our patients if we do not take the time to say, hey, I didn't understand that message. Can you say that again? Or, hey, I really wasn't paying attention. Because it happens. You're thinking about the sentence and you're thinking about this ongoing conversation and you're like, oh, whoa, I just missed an entire piece of that conversation. Hey, can you repeat that? Or can you summarize that? Or, just advocate, not for yourself, for your patient. Providers, if I have any providers in the room, slow down, take deep breaths, be kind to your interpreters. Your interpreters are not your competition. Your interpreters are not talking about you with the patient. And if they are smiling with the patient, it does not mean that they are laughing at you. I don't know why that is the concept, but do I have interpreters in here? Yes, okay. And does that seem to happen, patients smiling at you? They said some sort of colloquialism that was funny to, in your native language or whatever, and you smile, and then the provider's kind of like, oh, why are you smiling? Okay. Trust your interpreter. Your interpreter is your friend, providers, I promise. And interpreters, please stop being scared of your providers. You are one. So one huge difference that we have in between courtroom interpretation and between medical interpretation. Courtroom interpretation, if you are going to go before a judge, it does not matter how educated you are, unless you are a lawyer, you're not going to understand what the judge is saying. Does the judge care if you understand what they're saying? Probably not. That's how it is. They're going to start reading things and they're going to throw things at you, and then either they're saying that you're okay or that you're going to jail. You won't know until there's some handcuffs coming at you, right? Okay? Very, very different for medical interpretation, because medical interpretation, you're working as a team. The purpose of the interpreter, the purpose of the provider is to work together and help the patient understand what's happening in their life, to help better. So in a medical interpretation scenario, you guys are a team. So the quicker that we can see that, and that we can see each other as, one body of Christ and share the same passion of protecting the patient, it's just going to increase the way that you work better with your providers. So do I have providers in here? Okay, great, awesome. So I have a video up here. This is a demonstration of how, because this is all great that we're talking about interpreters, and you guys are like, well, there's not enough of them. Where do we get them from? This is a great way to kind of show you guys where we get our interpreters from. Volunteer interpreters are great. There are people in your community. If you guys are serving, type of population, whatever the language is in that community, most likely those people have children, those people have high school kids, that if you take them under your wing and you put them with an interpreter, they can be trained and they can serve their community. So you would be letting these kids know that they have a career opportunity by being bilingual, okay? You're giving the opportunity to interpreters to mentor children and invest in them and create relationships. You're giving your patients the opportunity to have someone that they can trust interpret for them, because it is always easier for someone that looks like you to interpret for you. Is it always what's available? No. But trust me, the trust factor there grows significantly. And I know it's hard to find interpreters. And you don't just go to whatever school and say, hey, loan me a whole bunch of interpreters. But you can find them. And if you can't find them already made, you can help build them. So I'm going to show you a quick video. This is what we do. Again, I'm from Crossings Community Clinic in Oklahoma City. The Hispanic community here, growing up as a child of an immigrant, we're voiceless. We don't have a voice. There are so many places that will not help you because... How do I turn this up? The up button?
Yeah, the up button.
That'd be great. Okay.
You don't speak their language. And to be able to be a part of that, to be able to be a voice for the people that don't have one is super powerful. And to be able to pour that into the students and the people that come into the clinic is so powerful. My name is Alexandra Caballero, and I'm the services coordinator for the Crossings Community Clinic, and I'm also a registered interpreter for the Supreme Court of Oklahoma. In this ministry, what we're doing is helping people understand what's wrong with them. So if you understand the situations, what's happening, that means that you can help someone else understand. You can help someone else take care of their diet and help them know what it is that the doctor is recommending. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It's just you being willing to serve, being willing to listen to what the person is saying, be able to transfer that into another language. And that, as simple as it might seem to others, is pretty amazing. It's a gift. It's a blessing.
When I first started, I thought I wasn't going to be able to make an impact on anybody because I was new to the words, but I learned from the doctors and they're so helpful to help explain what they're trying to say in simpler words so I can better interpret that. Whenever the doctor says something, they look straight to me to understand what the doctor is saying, so that makes me feel like I am fulfilling my duty to my brothers and sisters, how God or Christ had wanted me to.
A moment I will never forget was when I was with a doctor and this patient had bad news on top of bad news on top of bad news, and just getting to pray with them at the end of the appointment and getting to interpret that prayer that the doctor was saying. I saw joy in him and having hope that having all these bad news at the end of the day will be a lot better.
One way that I have seen God work through this clinic is by being a voice to those individuals that cannot speak English, letting them know that their healthcare is completely covered, whether it's for medical, dental. We are able to provide those services for those people who really, really need it.
sometimes there are people that are hurting and that are suffering, and they don't know that there is a God, that there is a place that is out there designated for them, and you could help them get there. You could help them by being that voice, by transferring messages from Jesus to them. And it's so powerful. If you do have the opportunity to serve in your community and bring others to Jesus, I would encourage you to.
So, interpreters, you are the voice for those people that do not have a voice. You are the difference between someone that is coming in from a third world country and has never received health care. They don't know what a wellness exam is, because in their countries you only go to the doctor when you're dying. And then you still kind of have to consider what kind of dying. Is it really, really dying, or are you just kind of hurt and we're going to patch you up? Then you really don't need to go to the doctor, right? We have such a privilege here in the U.S. to be able to have access to PCP care, right? And providers. Whenever your patients are not wanting to respond to those questions, when was your last pap smear, when was your last breast exam, it's because they don't even know that that's a thing. So they're not actually refusing the care. It's just weird to them that somebody cares. And this is the story for a lot of our people. I can speak from my mother was Guatemalan and my father Mexican, very, very hardworking. They came here illegally. They're immigrants. So the last thing that they thought about when they got to this country was to figure out where they were going to get their PCP care. There were other things that were of more priority for them. So whenever you get those type of patients in, they might be hurting. There might be something really, really wrong with them, but they're not going to tell you because they don't want to bother you with that, right? And as interpreters, we're sensitive to that, because whenever somebody tells you, oh yeah, I'm okay, in whatever language it is that you speak, you know how your people express themselves, and it is okay to go to the provider and say, hey, you know what, this person is telling you that they're okay, and that's the verbal message that they're conveying, but, here's this. Remember, interpreters and providers are a team. You are the voice for those that do not have a voice. You are the voice for the marginalized. You are the voice for those who are oppressed. Providers, you are the one person that can make a change in their lives, in their health, when no one else wants to. This interpreter that is coming in with you is going to be your voice. So your facial expressions, the way that that your tone of voice and everything matters. So yes, your interpreter is going to say the words that are coming out of your mouth, right? But your facial expression still matters. Your tone still matters. The way that you look at the patient still matters, because that does not need an interpreter. That's you. That's what you're sharing with the patient. I know that sometimes providers think that there's not that much of a connection because there's a language barrier. The heart of Christ doesn't need words, because you are just your fragrance is going to be the care that you're giving them. Your interpreter is just a plus. Because trust me, if they really needed you and you really want to help them, you'll figure it out even if you don't have an interpreter. That is one of the main things. Reach out to people in your community. These kids right here, we got them when they were 16 years old. They came into the clinic. They go to high school. To a high school that has a work-study program. It's called Cristo Rey. There's one Cristo Rey High School almost in every state in this country. It's a work-study program. They help the students get through. It's a private high school, but it's at a reduced price because they have a work-study program. So the clinics that have the opportunity to be able to invest in the education of these kids, come to them. You can request bilingual students, whatever the languages that you're needing, and then you invest in the kids, you train them, and then they come out and serve. These girls didn't know that being bilingual was special. It was just something that you grow up with. It's just something that you have to do. You go to school and you go to the grocery store and you do all of these things. They did not know it was a career. They did not know the impact that they could have in their community, and it's so powerful to let these young kids know that this is not only a career, but this is a way that you can give back, because being bilingual is a huge blessing. It is a gift, and that gift is not for you to just, be able to listen to 2 types of music. It's a gift that you need to share with your community, and serving Christ, bringing people together. That's what we do, right? Because that's the reconciliation that God calls us to, right? I think some of you got the handout. To be honest, there's only 9 people that registered to the class, so I didn't think I was going to need these that many. But I put in some quick pointers of just, providers, how to be just kind to your interpreters. And do remember, you are the provider. Always remember, you are the provider. If you forgot to tell your patient something, you do not send your interpreter to go give that message. You go right back in there. Remember, the interpreter is attached to you as a provider. So the interpreter goes where you go and vice versa. So don't separate from them, because then that could be a bit of a conflict, because then your patient's going to think that they have some sort of medical knowledge or that they can give some sort of medical advice. Interpreter, even if you know what the provider is going to say, we need to let the provider say that, because again, we don't want to fall into giving medical advice when we are not medical providers. That is one of the biggest things that it's just easy, and it sometimes whenever your interpreters are your medical assistants, you want to go ahead and relay this message. That can be kind of iffy, depending on what it is that you're doing. If it's just a checkout, then that's fine. But if the purpose of your interpreter is just to be an interpreter, don't send them in without you being there. And interpreter, don't go in there until your provider is ready for you. One of the things that we always have to remember is if it's not for the teamwork that you guys are doing, your provider, the patient, and the interpreter, you really couldn't do very much, right? So we all need from each other. We're all part of the body of Christ. And like I said, there's just this disconnect that the providers have from their interpreters. And I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating that you're trying to communicate with your patient and you're trying to show them that you love them and you're trying to give them medical care, and you can't explain that to them. But take advantage of the fact that there's somebody that's willing to be in there with you. A really great option for interpreters are PA students, medical students, nursing students. They will always be willing to learn from the PAs and the doctors and the nurses and the dentists. So them having the ability to speak both languages benefits them, because they also get to benefit from you, and ultimately the benefit is for the patient. So it's just a really, really great partnership. I'm going to pause just for a little bit because I know I'm a little bit everywhere. Does anybody have any questions? We have come into some French, and I think it was some sort of like Arabic dialect and stuff like that. We do have the language line for that. I don't really like the language line. It's not as personable, but if you have a need and you don't have an interpreter available, then that's an option. Yes, ma'am. 100%. 100%. Everybody needs to know what's going on with their care, what's going on with everything around them. I have a brother that is deaf, and he needs ASL interpretation all of the time. He carries around his phone, and we have an interpreter that's available whenever we go to doctor's visits, whenever we go to special places. I mean, this is the new norm. Not everybody can communicate with everybody, but there are ways around it. I mean, yes. As a foreign language, whoa. Caught me off guard with that one. I don't know that it's a foreign language. It could be. I don't know. Anybody else have any input to that? Can ASL be considered a foreign language?
I wouldn't say foreign, but I just feel like it should be part of that because coming from personally my clinic, we do have that, and we have that a lot. So I feel as though that should be something that's actually included, but I wouldn't say foreign. Yeah. Special. Like another.
I would say a separate language, distinct language, but maybe not foreign.
Yeah, distinct maybe.
Because it is American Sign Language, and it is in English. So
Some contexts, I know there are universities where sign language is not counted as a language for those in the arts and sciences, such as pre-med. So we have been fighting for almost 20 years to get that changed. Because they do not believe that it is a language, even though ASL is the main form of communication for the deaf communities in countries such as Mexico or Haiti, and that is not America.
And I'm Haitian, and that's that.
that
According to your opinion, I see that both sides.
that is very interesting.
Like my boyfriend literally has his cousin, yeah, so it's her boyfriend. And they have 2 kids that are hearing. The 7-year-old knows ASL. So when I want to ask her mom something, I go to the 7-year-old.
Yeah.
Or I text it on my phone, and I'm like, I wish I knew how to communicate with her.
Like I said,
But to me, it's a whole nother, because there's certain things that you can't really translate, and there's certain words that
Right.
are different. So, like, to me, it is a language, I think. And it needs to be recognized.
It 100% is, and I know that your medical patients, and even in a court of law, they are entitled to have an interpreter to understand what is happening. That is just how it is legally. Now, your university, I mean, you'd have to probably ask someone. Would you happen to have any knowledge on that?
It is almost, it is a separate and distinct language. It's just not verbal. And there is sign language in English and sign language in virtually any other language. Okay? And the interpreters are extremely skilled. If you ever watch the evening news on television, you will frequently see that there is somebody signing off to the side, as
Yep.
it should be.
for Rihanna.
Oh, yes. She is.
Because the way she was keeping up with just the beat.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You had a comment?
No, I was just going to say I was a foreign language major for a communication. And I think that a lot of universities in their core curriculum, they use foreign language as part of like their humanities, part of their core curriculum. And so that's just been historically part of what universities have done. They require students to come through and just like they take math and science to take like a foreign language or something like that. But I think that a lot of universities now are like stepping away from It's very useful in certain areas. So.
100%.
And a question, I think that's kind of more agreeing with you with using the online or the call-in translator lines. If we translate in our clinic as MA and just front desk people, but sometimes I go with people to the hospital and they insist on a language line translator, and sometimes I'm appalled at the level of translation that's going on, because I understand both sides, but they won't let me translate, and I'm just like, no, that guy, they don't understand at all, and they're just making up something.
The patient insists or the hospital insists?
The hospital insists. The
Oh.
patient sometimes like, no, I want her to translate, but they say legally we have to do this. Now, over time, sometimes they let us, but sometimes they don't. Depends on the nurse, depends on the doctor.
I think that legalistically they have to have someone that's registered or certified in order to do that. Unfortunately, my mom passed away from cancer in 2019, and I was not able to be her interpreter because I was not yet registered. And they did do a language line, and I did see what you were seeing. So.
We have, with the Afghan population, we have a lot of Iranians who are saying they're speaking Afghan-Dari and are not, and are simply to translate because it's good money.
Right. Yes. So with the complete intention of being critical whenever I was put in that situation and my mom wasn't understanding what was happening with her care, I mean, even though it was maybe a more aggressive approach, I would correct the interpreter. And just keep doing that until the provider realizes, hey, then maybe this isn't the best option. Even though that's kind of an insult to the interpreter that's on the thing. But again,
The times that we're not there, so what's happening to more people with language lines?
Yes. There is nothing like an in-person interpreter. There is nothing like someone who has been a part of the community and that understands the colloquialisms and the idioms that our people speak, being whatever language it is. So, yes.
Do you have any online resources that you would recommend that are better than just Googling, intake phrases or things that might help people who are not interpreters but who speak some Spanish? You know what I mean? Like that's better than just Google search.
For specific, like checkout instructions.
Spanish. It's very selfish, but like I do all of our intake for our clinic and
Uh-huh.
speak some Spanish, but I would like to get better practice. And when I looked up, I've got some books and I've got some things, but it's to me, it's I don't know. I'm a listener, so when I Googled it, it's like just a deluge of.
Does your EMR system have the ability to translate the checkout paperwork for you? I know some of them do.
Solid question. Don't have the answer, but.
It took me about 3 years after working there to realize that I had been translating things unnecessarily. I don't, because I'm not really a great big fan of websites. So I'm really sorry, and I'm not saying that all websites are horrible. I just wouldn't, and I'm being completely honest with you, because I go on those websites and I don't understand what is being said, and your patient isn't going to understand what's being said, and then you do have to consider where your patient's coming from. So specifically, being in Spanish, that's my source language. We have, Mexicans, we have Guatemalans, we have Puerto Ricans, we have Dominicans, we have Cubans. One word means something completely different over here. And, you could be being really nice to someone, and then this other person from a different part of Central America thinks that you are saying something very nasty to them. So I would be very, very careful about the websites. if you have someone that maybe you can talk to, somebody from maybe your church or someone from, one of your coworkers or somebody that is willing to say, hey, teach me these phrases, would be way, way, way better than a website. 100%. Yes. Yes.
I just want to add on to that. Personally, a person coming from the West Coast and East Coast, and I was on the first floor, so I'm just like the first person where everybody has to talk to me. So I have to speak Spanish, and I always say que poquito, like I say a little bit. I do the best that I can, and for me personally, learning over the years, the websites does not help because, again, from a person from both coasts, Spanish is very different. So if you're telling somebody that's a Puerto Rican something versus somebody that's Mexican, it's two different things. So I've learned that the hard way. So it's like I personally would love to be with somebody that's like Spanish speaking, so I can be like, hey, how do you say go upstairs to the second floor? Siguiendo piso. Something like that. I'd rather just get it from the mouth and learn it than to go on a website because, man, that felt me tremendously. So, yeah, that's it.
And I just want to point something out that, some clinics don't have the opportunity to have an interpreter, or we just haven't gotten there yet, or whatever. That effort that you're making is so powerful. It is so powerful. Somebody trying, somebody acknowledging that there is a language barrier and just trying, that's God right there. Just you trying. So thank you for that.
And the thing is, too, I speak French and Creole, but they
Woo!
the thing is, Spanish is not the same. It's not the same. So when people are like, oh, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. So I have to learn Spanish the right way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
It's like, especially with the Afghan patients, you have to build the trust.
Yes.
You have to build the trust, and it's like most of the times the mothers are the ones who are bringing the children to the clinics, right? So we have like a couple of issues already because the father is like the culture and everything is so different. So one time, one of the fathers tried to insult me and put me under the ground, and I step out and I say, no here, It's like, I respect you, you respect me, and now we're building like that trust, like they are letting wives to go by themselves or with the translator to the clinic. And we are so fortunately because some of them, they say like they see us as family now, So that's very important to build the trust. Even though that we have language barriers and everything, but to build that trust is the most important. And of course, they love our doctor, and whatever he say is like what it have to be.
It's the effort that you're putting towards. Yes.
If I could go back for a moment to the point that was raised when somebody is not satisfied with what an interpreter is doing. With telephonic and video remote interpreting, and I admire them. I don't do either of those. I only do it in person. But they always begin by telling you their name and and they give you an interpreter number. And I have trained a number of dentists on how to work with telephonic and video remote interpreters. And this one dentist said, oh, there's this one interpreter. I know she's not going to interpret right, and I just get so fed up, I hang up the phone on her. And what do you do then? Well, understand, now you've got a patient like this. So the dentist doesn't want to get into a discussion with the interpreter. Hangs up, redials, finishes the treatment session, and then I said, what do you do then? Hope I never get that blank interpreter again. I said, well, you're never going to improve the system.
Mm-hmm.
We all can have bad days. We can all make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever you're working with an interpreter, physically, online, on the phone, whatever, write in your, or have the providers write in their notes who the interpreter was. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to get improvement. So the dentist said, well, what do you think would happen if I called the company and complained? Well, if you call in the tone of your complaining, that generally gets people on the defensive. If you call and say, look, I've had a situation, I think we could do this better, here's what I think happened, and the interpreter was so on and so forth. And I know another situation where somebody was using a telephonic interpreter, female patient, and the husband started to use very foul language. The interpreter made a mistake. The interpreter asked the social worker, do you want to hear everything that was said, or do you just want to know it was bad language? And the social worker said, no, I don't need to hear all of that. Turns out several days later that the police got involved because the husband had almost killed the wife. And then when the police came doing the backtracking to the social worker encounter, and the social worker said, oh yeah, there was a lot of foul language. Can you give us an example of what was said? No. All right, who was your interpreter? I didn't annotate who it was.
Mm-hmm.
So annotate, even for the physical interpreter in the room, annotate, or have the medical staff annotate who it was.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really, really great point. I mean, interpreters, you are there to be that voice. So even if it is foul language, even if it is something that you're not comfortable interpreting, that's your job. That's what you're doing. You're interpreting. The provider will then make the decision. I know that sometimes we get frustrated as interpreters because they have already asked the PA 6 times if they are supposed to take this medicine 3 times daily. So once the 7th time comes around, then you're kind of looking at the patient like, well, it's been established. But that could be something that triggers the provider to say, okay, this patient isn't getting it. What am I doing? How can I rephrase this? And that you answering for the provider is taking away the opportunity for the provider to make that connection and to establish that relationship with the patient. So remember, you're facilitating, you're being a voice for them, so you need to be that voice, but you're also being a voice for the provider. So let the provider respond, even if they're gonna have to respond the same question 7 times, and even if it is foul language. You need to make sure that your provider is understanding the message, because the provider has the knowledge to know how to react and what steps to take next.
may or may
there's some ability to interpret as far as like a provider can speak some Spanish, but like may not be completely fluent yet, and maybe from being in that environment can get better and learn some and still care for those patients, even if they have a hard care for those patients. But is there like a want or a need for that, or is it more like we would prefer? And obviously, there's a preference for like being fully fluent. But like, is there room and grace for like a transitioning period, like in between? If that makes sense.
I think that there's always room and grace, right? And I think that versus not being able to understand anything about what's going on with your care, then having someone that knows kind of what's going on is better than not having a clue. One thing that I would be very, very cautious with is that if you are going to try and you know that maybe this terminology isn't your forte, I would just let the provider know, like, hey, I would just be super, super clear with the provider. If you have interpreter friends, or if you have friends that speak the language that you are, that's your target language, right? Then I would, I would engage with them. But one of the things is, if you are going to put yourself in the situation to where it's a minor and you can kind of help people understand, that's really great. And there's a lot of providers that have that too. They have some sort of Spanish knowledge, but it's really important for the patient to know and for the provider to know, hey, I really want to help, and this is my contribution to the clinic or whatever it is that's happening, but make it very, very clear. And the first thing that you have to be super, super comfortable saying is, I don't know what you just said. Okay? I am 100% serious. I mean, I walked into a room with a cardiologist. She wasn't having the best day, and she started saying all of these words. And I just looked at her, and I was just like, okay, yeah, that's not going to happen today. Because, we're not at that level. And I'd rather have her maybe get a little upset at me than tell this patient that there's something wrong with their heart or their arteries or something else, and then, maybe they just have really high blood pressure. So, instead of speaking for the provider or trying to make out what the provider said, like I said, providers, I know we have a few providers in here, please have grace with your interpreters. And if you are using an interpreter and you know that your interpreter maybe isn't very savvy with whatever your specialty is, use layman's terms. Explain things. I had a doctor that she does injections and stuff like that, and she would explain, little white cells as being little warriors, and then the medicine, being this to help them amp up, and just all this visual stuff that you're kind of like, okay, I can explain that. And then even the patient, right? Instead of using all that terminology that even an English patient might not understand, it's simple and it makes the point. Remember that your point is not for your patient to learn the medical terminology that it took you 30 years to learn. The point is that the patient understands that they need to take their medication so their A1C can go down, right? Yes, ma'am. So you have a responsibility to be on the doctor's side. Okay, you have to remember you are not the provider. The provider is in the room with you. Okay, if a patient has issues wanting to share this information with the provider, you can express that to the provider. Hey, she just explained this to me. She's not quite comfortable, telling you, and This is a way that you can advocate and intercede, but 100% anything that is said in the room, the provider must know. If it is coming out of the patient's mouth, it is going to be expressed to the provider 100%. And vice versa. Yes, 100%. If the doctor is saying, oh my God, this person is not understanding me, I don't know what is happening. Oh my God, this patient is not understanding me, he does not know what is happening, okay? It's their right. It's the patient's right, and it's helping the provider, okay? I have gotten providers that get frustrated. Now, I'm one of the interpreters. I don't mimic the emotion, right? So sometimes the patient is really frustrated and they are saying many, many words, and I'm just saying the words and I'm kind of chill, so the provider's a little confused as to, hey, what's going on here? You don't have to interpret the emotions. Is it helpful sometimes? It's debatable. Different interpreters have different opinions, but the key point is your provider has to know absolutely everything. If the patient says something that you think might be irrelevant, it's not our choice to make. It's for the provider, because the provider could be thinking, this person is just not taking care of themselves. They're not taking their insulin, for example, and they gave you the small detail that they stopped carbohydrates, but they're still eating potatoes. And as interpreters, we're like, okay, that's not important. But then the provider realizes, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to go over what carbohydrates are, right? We're going to have to go over whatever it is that the patient is trying to express. Every single statement that the patient makes has to be conveyed to the provider, specifically when they are going to endanger themselves.
And vice versa. I had been interpreting for a specialist 3 times a month for 6 years. This man was an absolute gem to interpret for. He spoke reasonably, short sentences. He did not use too many technical terms. And I noticed him one day taking an exceptionally long period of time to check out a patient, and I could tell he was becoming frustrated. And all of a sudden, he threw his arms down, and I am going to drop the register and not say exactly what he said. He said, I have no effing idea what this SOB has. And before he finished, I took another breath. I rendered that in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh my God, you didn't. Get out. And he and I walked into the hallway, and he said, you just embarrassed me. That wasn't for the patient. I said, doctor, you and I know each other way too long. You know that my code of ethics demands that if I hear it, I must render it. Well, I was frustrated. Yes, you were. Mm-hmm. And the patient has the absolute right to know that, and I have the legal and the moral obligation to take what you said and render it in Spanish. And he said, what do I do now? No, he went back in, he apologized, he said, your presentation is something I haven't seen, but I assure you that I will get to the bottom of it. And I had said to the doctor, if you were the patient, how would you feel if the doctor didn't know what you had and nobody told you that the doctor didn't know? We're not there to be judge and jury. Do you remember, any of you, when you were younger and you played with 2 cans and a string? Hello? And somebody put the other can up? Think of the interpreters as the string that lets the 2 people with the cans communicate to each other. Mm-hmm. We're not there to filter, to make it sound better. If it's bad, it's bad. We don't mess with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I love it. I love it. Well, we have 5 minutes left. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? No. So just a reminder, interpreters, you are the voice for the people that do not have a voice. There are people that will not receive care and that will not trust a provider if you're not there with them. So take that very, very seriously, because you're there for them. God has placed you in the clinic with them so you can serve Jesus, so you can serve this patient. Providers, take a deep breath, be patient, speak slowly. Please don't try to teach your patients all of the terminology that it took you multiple years to learn. Just be simple. It's a conversation. We're all working together for the same purpose, and it's to better the patients. Yes?
I wanted to say one of the things that our clinical coordinator, she's from Nigeria, I'm Hispanic, my clinical coordinator is from Nigeria, that she reminds our providers and the rest of our volunteers who are only English speaking, that a lot of these patients are more educated than we're giving them credit for.
Yes.
A lot of them, they might only speak Spanish and understand a little bit of English, maybe Haitian Creole and speak a little bit of French, English, and Spanish. And I saw something in your handout, Alexandra, that resonated with me. Speaking louder to them doesn't help. Oh, yes. No. They're not.
Oh, yes.
They're not hard of hearing.
No, yes.
These are very educated individuals who are coming from situations that they're being placed in a vulnerable situation. I have patients that are in the medical field, but they came from the Dominican Republic for whatever the reason might be, and they can't practice medicine in the United States because the United States doesn't recognize that they are medical professionals. But they're trying to study English, but they can exercise that role that they So these are educated people. They're in vulnerable situations. They're not slow. They're not educated. They just kind of like need our kindness, and they need us to be just a little bit more patient.
Yes, 100%. Okay. Yes.
I think that what you said about not teaching, trying to get things simple. I translated for a clinic, an OB clinic, and they really wanted me to tell this village lady from Afghanistan who was Pashtun about the chromosomes and the chromosome test and all this. And I said, listen, she doesn't even know she has cells. She's never been a day to
Yes.
school. Do you want me to start there? Or I can tell her this is a blood test to see if the baby's going to have problems that come from the family. Do you want that or not? But I had to educate the doctors, like, we can't do this.
And that's something that the provider's going to have to evaluate. But, I mean, you can only do what you can do. But advising the doctor is the best option, yes.
Some of them are really educated, and then we have some people that they're not. They're very smart.
Very, very, very smart. You know, I had a doctor that was talking about hypertension to one of our patients. He didn't know he had a blood pressure. So, you know, but that's for the provider to know, and that's for the provider to make that decision of how they're going to address that. Thank you guys so much.